We're on to week 12, aka the Bipocalypse. You're gonna have some tough wide receiver start-sit decisions. Let's help you out and go through all the games, talk about all the receivers that matter. This week, the Bills, Bengals, Falcons, Jaguars, Saints, and Jets are all off. We'll start you off with a must-start tier. Not very long this week at receiver, but you can still trust Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, Nico Collins, and Mike Evans if he plays. Before we talk start-sit, let's talk NFL pick'ems. You want to make sure you lock in your picks on Underdog, and if for some reason you haven't signed up for Underdog yet, well, you get a free pick. In week 12, it's Jameis Winston on Thursday night, just getting a yard. That's right. Take the higher on 0.5 total yards. That's your free pick'em as a new customer. Just sign up using code ENDGAME, because when you do that as a new customer on Underdog, you get the free pick. Plus, you get up to $1,000 of bonus cash. Let's start with that Thursday night matchup. The Steelers at the Browns. George Pickens. All right, so he didn't go nuclear against the Ravens defense. He's still pretty good, and I think he can still be pretty good against the Browns.
I agree. The Browns have not been a shutdown secondary, and he's been so good since Russell Wilson has taken over. I have to have Pickens as a strong start this week.
He's got to be still a strong start. You think this matchup isn't nearly as good? Might be wrong, because since Jameis Winston has taken over, this Browns secondary is one of the worst, or at least I should say, they are bottom 5 in terms of fantasy points allowed to wide receivers. They just like to play fast paced when Winston's in there. George Pickens should actually have just as good a game, maybe even better. I'll tell you what, I can't even explain why on Underdog his line right now is 55.5 yards. He's gone way over that in every game since Russell Wilson's been the quarterback. So if for some reason you haven't tried Underdog yet, use that free pick and take George Pickens higher than 55.5 yards. Just make sure when you sign up for the first time, you use code ENDGAME to get the free picks and your bonus cash. Now, last week against the Ravens, Mike Williams did nothing. Absolutely nothing. Do you think he does something this week?
He might do something, but it's not going to be in my fantasy lineup. I am benching Mike Williams.
It's curious that they didn't even just have him out there to throw it to him at all. Let's just keep him on the bench if you even have him. Now, the Browns, on the other hand, we got 3 wide receivers that are worth talking about. Let's start with Jerry Jeudy, who went off last week. Do you think that he is worth starting this week?
I think he's worth starting, but don't expect last week's performance. This is the Steelers, but he's had 21 targets over the last 2 games with Jameis Winston. He's the number 1 guy here, so I'm going to say Jerry Jeudy, a low-end solid start this week.
I'm going to keep him at the flex tier just because, look, I'm not dogging him or what he did. If not for that one long touchdown, he probably would have given exactly what I expected. A floor kind of performance, a few catches, 60-something yards. I kind of think that's what he's going to give you most weeks, and this is the Steelers, a very tough defense, so I think he's still a floor play as a flex. Now, a receiver that a lot of you did start and didn't go off was Cedric Tillman. What do you make of him now, especially against the Steelers?
I'm a little nervous for Cedric Tillman. I think the upside is still there, but the floor just isn't quite as high, so I'm going to have him as a flex play, a flex with upside.
I'm going to also keep him as a flex. This is what we figured with Tillman going forward. One of those boom-bust type of players. We had gotten 3 booms in a row. You figured this was coming. Tough matchup. He's still a risky flex. And so now Elijah Moore, yep, he's back on the fantasy radar, but where does he fall?
I can't put him any more than a flex, and even then it's risky. We've seen this from Elijah Moore, right? He has a good game, and then he disappears. He's only a flex this week.
Exactly. And you might notice I got all of the Browns receivers in the exact same place because now they got 3 options, and we're not going to know on a weekly basis who's going to go off, who isn't. Again, a tough matchup. He's just a flex. Chiefs at the Panthers. Just when we looked like DeAndre Hopkins was emerging, now all of a sudden we had a couple of duds. Does he get right in Carolina?
He should. This is the Carolina Panthers. Let's not forget, before these 2 tough matchups, he had a really nice game. I think he bounces back. I'm not going to say a strong start, but I think he's a solid start.
He definitely should. And like you said, I don't want to go too high on him just based on the matchup, but this should be a spot where you can somewhat trust him, so should be solid. And just when we had basically forgotten Xavier Worthy existed, or at least tried to, here he goes, star of the first half last week, and now he gets the Panthers. Interested?
I'm interested, but again, only as a flex and a risky flex. We know the upside is there, but the floor really isn't. But it's a Panther, so he can be flexed.
I really don't feel like much has changed. You still need that one big play, and he could do that, especially against Carolina, but it is not guaranteed. So he's still, to me, a boom bust flex type. So where does that leave Juju Smith-Schuster?
If I had Juju Smith-Schuster anywhere, it would leave him on the bench for me. I'm not starting him.
Gonna agree with that. Even the best of matchups can't convince me to start Juju this week. Now on the Panthers side, Xavier Legette, I guess, is technically the number one receiver there. He's last man standing. Can he do something against this Chiefs defense?
Maybe, but you're just really praying for a touchdown here. I would prefer to avoid Legette this week.
He has at least scored some touchdowns. I feel like he's going to have to get targets. They're probably going to be down at some point. I think he's a flex option just because of so many teams that are on bye. We do have to mention that although we don't know right now, we could see the return of Adam Thielen. That's right, that Adam Thielen. If he plays, do you think he's worth a flex?
I'm not starting Adam Thielen. Coming off a long injury with Bryce Young against the Chiefs, let me wait a week and see.
That's exactly right. We can wait a week. I mean, maybe he gets peppered with targets, but I think I'll take that chance with him on the bench. Now, hopefully this video helps you with all your start sit decisions, but if you still have questions for start sit, waiver wire trades, or anything fantasy football related, use the Draft Lane app because that connects you directly with Chris and myself for all your fantasy football needs. Download it for free right now. Vikings at the Bears. No, not nervous about Justin Jefferson. You have to start him. Now, Jordan Addison did score a long touchdown here. You think that he's worth starting?
This is what Jordan Addison does. Every 3 or 4 games, he scores or does something, and then he disappears. It's the Bears. I don't feel good about Addison. Risky flex.
That's exactly right. Not a great matchup. You never know. I mean, he is one of those quintessential boom bust types. So flex if you need him. And now for the Bears, let's take a hard look at this receiving core. We know we got 3 options with new OC Thomas Brown. Things were better, but not amazing in terms of fantasy production. Although DJ Moore had a decent game, can he have a decent game against the Vikings?
I think he can. I like the way they ran this offense. I like the way they used him. He's not going to have incredible upside in this offense, but I think he's at least a solid start this week against the Vikings.
He got the targets. Caleb Williams, they had him making smarter decisions. They actually kept him upright. I mean, it's not a great matchup. This Vikings defense does give up points to wide receivers, so I think he is at least a solid start. Look, as far as Rome Odunze, I actually like him a little bit better because he got more target share than DJ Moore. I won't go much higher. I'll say he's at least a solid start as well, though.
Exactly. He's also a solid start for me.
So where does that leave Keenan Allen, the veteran?
Keenan actually also got more targets than DJ Moore, although less than Odunze, but the production just isn't there. I mean, Keenan Allen just not much of a ceiling these days, so just a flex start.
The ceiling, I don't know if the ceiling will ever come back for Keenan Allen, to be honest, but it gets you some points, just don't expect much more. So a flex, it's kind of a boring one. All right, now we got the Titans at the Texans. Look, before you say, I should have known with Calvin Ridley, I will say he could have that long touchdown that was called back by penalty. All right, so he didn't go off, but what do you think about Calvin Ridley in this matchup?
I don't hate Calvin Ridley in this matchup. I had him as a flex last week. I'm going to have him as a flex this week. He at least has upside, so he's got that, but still just a flex for me.
Well, I will say this, besides the fact I'm kind of always slightly higher on Calvin Ridley for reasons I still can't explain this year. He's getting the massive target share. There's so many missed opportunities that are so close. The Texans have given up a lot of points really to wide receivers lately. So I think he's at least in the solid tier. And what do you make of Tank Dell in this matchup, which really isn't great against a tough Titans secondary?
Not a great matchup, and even last week where Nico wasn't playing all the snaps, didn't necessarily go off, so I'll say Tank Dell this week, just a flex option.
Yeah, he's fast becoming one of the more aggravating players in fantasy. Hasn't hit those highs we really expected. And Stephon Diggs being out really hasn't helped him as much as it should, so I think he's just a flex in a tough spot. Lions coming off that beatdown of the Jaguars, now get another team from that division. It's the Colts. What about Jameson Williams? Had himself a nice game in week 11.
He did a very nice game, but Jameson Williams, one of these guys, I just always look at him as an upside flex. Like, he's one of the flexes I want to start because he's got so much upside, but I don't ever feel like I can move him to the solid start tier.
I'll do it. I was really high on him last week. He came through. Look, I know it's not the Jags, but this Colts defense isn't that great. I think he's a solid start this week. That upside is there. He's been actually consistent this year, and I think that continues, especially if Sam Laporta doesn't play again, which who knows, but I like Williams enough to call him a solid start. And Josh Downs was surprisingly good last week, even with Anthony Richardson. Does he keep it going against the Lions?
This is a very good matchup for Josh Downs against the Lions, but again, I can't ever consider him more than a flex start right now with Anthony Richardson. Let me see a couple games in a row of him being really good.
I can't be too down on Downs because the targets are still there. Again, the Lions sounds scary, but they give up points to wide receivers. It is a good individual matchup for him. I think he's at least in a solid tier as well. Michael Pittman, maybe not quite so solid. What do you think?
Yeah, not quite so solid, but he did lead the team in targets with 8 last week. Didn't come through with the game that Josh Downs did, and the Lions, not a great secondary. So I'm going to say Michael Pittman also a flex start.
I'll put Pittman in the flex range. We haven't really seen a big game from him at all this year. I like Downs better, so he could get you some points, but I just don't know where the ceiling is. And then there's the rookie A.D. Mitchell. I mean, he is looking pretty good, but is there enough opportunity for him here?
No, opportunity just not there for him. You really need him to find the end zone, which he should have done last week, but without that, you're going to be left with almost nothing. I'm going to avoid Mitchell this week.
Yeah, I'd almost like to call him a desperation flex, but again, it would have to be a really deep league, 14-teamer, or man, maybe you just have all your wide receivers on bye, so you probably shouldn't need him. Let's just say avoid. Patriots at the Dolphins. Demario Douglas still kind of hanging on to fantasy relevance. Is he relevant in Week 12?
He's nothing more than a PPR floor play, and that just doesn't do it for me. I'm going to avoid Demario Douglas.
Definitely not the most exciting option. At least he was involved semi-frequently. I know it's not a great matchup. The Dolphins secondary has been good, but he could get you some points if you need him, so I'll keep him as a flex. Do you feel any better about Kendrick Bourne, who, led the Patriots in receiving, caught a touchdown? Do you think he's coming on?
Maybe, but again, you just never know with this Patriots offense. Without that touchdown, I mean, what are you really going to get here? I'm going to also avoid Kendrick Bourne.
I'll also just stick him in the flex range. Again, guy who could get you a big play if you need it. Now, Tyreek Hill, still showing some signs of life, although he is not still in that must-start tier. Is he close?
He's getting there. One more game like this, we might have to put him back, but he's still definitely a strong start.
Agree. Strong start. Most leagues, you're still starting Hill. Jalen Waddle, on the other hand, I mean, that was it, right? He had his chance. I think I'm out. I know you're out.
Yeah, I've been out for a couple weeks. He's already had his last chance with me. He's a hard avoid.
Bucks taking on the Giants. We're hoping Mike Evans is back. If so, you play him. You don't have to think about it. If he is or if he isn't, does Jalen McMillan, the rookie, have any relevance here?
I mean, I'll have some relevance because it's the Giants, but again, what is the upside here for Jalen McMillan? He's had chances with Evans and Godwin out and done almost nothing. I'm not starting McMillan.
Like, if you couldn't do anything before, why would it change now? Injury, no injury, I don't think that's the issue here. Let's just avoid McMillan. And now it's time for the million-dollar question. Malik Neighbors gets Tommy DeVito as his quarterback. He also gets the Tampa Bay secondary here. What do you make of him?
Yeah, this is going to be a tough one this week. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of Malik Neighbors questions, but it's such a good matchup, and he gets so many targets, and I don't think Tommy DeVito is going to be worse than Daniel Jones, I hope. So I'm going to say strong start.
I think you gotta take a chance here. Malik Neighbors did have some big games with Daniel Jones. He can do it with Tommy DeVito. I actually kind of feel better that it's DeVito and not Drew Lock, but you got Neighbors. I think you've got to trust the matchup here. And I will say, as I said on the waiver video, there's got to be some opportunity for Wan'Dale Robinson just based on the targets he's getting.
I guess, but what is the upside here? And is Tommy DeVito, he only went over 200 passing yards once all last season. I don't know. Wan'Dale Robinson just doesn't have the ceiling for me. I guess a floor flex in PPR.
Well, look, I'm not going to go overboard here. I still just have him as a flex, but I think he might be one of the better flex options this week. Cowboys at the Commanders. Let's talk CeeDee Lamb. It feels like they're still trying to find ways to manufacture touches for him. You know he's leading this team in targets, but still Cooper Rush, and this Commanders defense has been really good. So what tier does he fall in?
I'm going to put him in the solid start tier, but the very low end of the solid start, because like you said, they're getting him touches, they're getting him targets. It's not like Cooper Rush is a complete disaster. I think he's a solid start, but low end of the solid start.
Couldn't agree more. That's exactly where he belongs. You can start him, you just don't love it like you should. A lot of disappointment in Terry McLaurin last week for disappearing. Not that it was his fault. Does he bounce back here?
He's got to. It's the Cowboys. I mean, it wasn't his fault last week, but a little bit of his fault because he could not get separation against Quinyon Mitchell. There's no Quinyon Mitchell on the Cowboys. He should feast here. I'm going to say strong start for Terry McLaurin.
I think he bounces back in a big way. He's going to be a very strong start this week. I think if I have Terry, I'm firing him up everywhere. Broncos at the Raiders. Well, not a whole lot of players to talk about here. Let's start with the one Broncos receiver you know will be involved, Courtland Sutton.
You got to feel very good about Courtland Sutton here against the Raiders. I have him in the solid start tier, and I'm really debating strong start tier for Courtland Sutton. I think he's right there on the border of solid and strong start, but I think if you got Courtland Sutton, for the most part, get him in your lineup.
I think solid is about right. Actually, digging into the stats, surprising that the Raiders don't give up many points to wide receivers, and they don't give up big games. I think only 100-yard game, and the Broncos are spreading it out, and the Broncos are just very unpredictable in general. I'll say he's still a solid start, though. And on the other side, if there's any Raider who has some sort of fancy relevance at the receiver position, it's still Jacoby Myers, but how much?
Well, you can't feel good. It's the Broncos. But the last time they played the Broncos, he had a pretty nice game. But there's not really a ceiling here. So Jacoby Myers, just a flex.
Agreed. Just a flex and not one I really want to take a chance on. And man, I honestly think this Raiders offense might be the worst in the NFL at this point of the season. 49ers at Packers should be a good one. You know, let's start with the number one receiver for San Francisco. It's Juwan Jennings. Yeah, it just is. We've seen that for a couple of games. You felt he was going to have a big game last week. He did. Does he do it again?
Why not? He's clearly the number one here. He's getting the targets, getting the first read percentage. He looks good. Brock Purdy seems to trust him. I think Juwan Jennings, once again, a strong start.
Forget the fact you plucked him off of waivers. You didn't know who he was before this year, whatever. Look at the stats. He's the guy Brock Purdy seems to trust the most. He's still a strong start and probably will be as the season finishes. So now the question is, where does Debo fall? We haven't seen that big Debo-type game in quite a while.
No, we haven't. But that is the thing with Debo. He can always have those huge games out of nowhere. Just, he could take one screen pass 60, 70 yards to the house. But I don't feel as good about him as I do for Jennings. So I'm going to say solid start, but towards the higher end of the solid start.
Yeah, we can't just write him off. I mean, it's not like he's doing nothing. So Debo, solid, feels about right. Now, Ricky Pearsall, didn't really step up, even though George Kittle was out last week. What do you think Pearsall can do in this matchup?
He's either going to get you a touchdown or a long play, or he's going to kill you. I'm not doing it. Benching Pearsall.
I could say, just again, because there's a lot of players that are going to be absent this week, he's still a risky flex, just very risky. Now, time for that Packers receiver core. Let's start with Jayden Reed at home against the Niners. Where does he land?
I'm finally moving Jayden Reed down to the flex tier. I don't care that his name is Jayden Reed. It's like saying his name is Deebo Samuel. I don't care. Where is the production from Jayden Reed this year? He's had like 2-3 good games, and that's it. It's the 49ers. He's only a flex.
All right, we're going to differ on this one. I'm bumping him up a notch. I really think he gets more involved in this game. This 49ers defense is not nearly what it used to be. I think they're going to get Reed more involved. I think he might even be a strong start this week based on the coverages. And Christian Watson, of course, just when you forgot about him, had his biggest game. In fact, I think his biggest yardage game ever receiving. Now he gets the Niners. Do you trust him?
I never trust Christian Watson, but again, he's a flex with upside. He's risky, but he's got upside.
Like, it almost doesn't matter what he does, good or bad. I can't ever really move him up or down because just when you're in, he takes a step back, He's a flex, and he's going to boom or he's going to bust. And speaking of bust, Romeo Doubs, a lot of nothing last week. Do you think he bounces back?
He could. He's always got touchdown upside, so barely a flex.
I mean, you forget about him and write him off, he'll probably wind up doing something, scoring a touchdown. He is still at least flexible. Now let's talk Cardinals at Seahawks. Marvin Harrison Jr., it's always tough to know where to rank him, so where do you have him in Week 12?
I have him as a solid start. He was kind of coming on before the bye week, had a couple nice games there. Seahawks secondary doesn't scare me off him. He's definitely risky, but I think he's solid.
A lot of times it's running backs that get that little bump after the bye. In this case, I'm hoping that they actually spent some time designing more plays for Harrison to get open and not just have him run deep. We started to see a little bit here and there. Seattle has actually been giving up a lot of points to wide receivers lately. I don't want to go too far, though. I'll say he's still a very solid start. Now in Seattle, is there a changing of the guard? Not sure. The leading receiver was not DK Metcalf, but gotta wonder if DK Metcalf is still the best fantasy receiver.
I think he is. I mean, remember, that's the 49ers. They always do a pretty good job on DK Metcalf. Not that they shut him down last week, but he's still the number one here. I think he still has the most upside. I think he's still the guy you want. I think he's still a strong start.
I mean, it's not like he was bad at all. He gave you some points. He always has that big play ability, so I think he's still always going to be a strong start for me. But now, we might have to just say yes to JSN, the leading receiver, even with DK back. He's done it a couple times in a row now. Do we have to be in?
I think we do. I'm not going to say a strong start like DK Metcalf, even though I know he outscored him and has had 2 big games in a row, but I am bumping him up to the solid start tier.
I'm not going to assume that JSN is just going to all of a sudden be the guy from here on out, but you got to consider him at least a solid start. This should be a game that features a lot of passing. So does that leave room for Tyler Lockett in your flex spot maybe?
No, I don't even think he's worth a flex. Barely came through 2 weeks ago with DK Metcalf out, did nothing this week. I'm out on Tyler Lockett.
I think I have to be out too because that's what you realize JSN coming on. Lockett's the one that is affected the most. Just not enough upside here, so let's just sit him. Eagles at the Rams. This is a game full of fantasy studs at the wide receiver position. Unfortunately, Devontae Smith hasn't been one of those guys lately. This is a bounce back spot.
It should be. On paper, it is. The Rams secondary, that is definitely a bounce back spot, but I'm very nervous for Devonta Smith right now. But because it's the Rams, I'm going to say solid start, but very risky.
2 straight weeks, I've said this should be a good Devonta Smith game. It hasn't been. I can't understand why, other than the fact that Saquon Barkley is so good, they don't really need to pass the ball that much. It should be a decent game, but I can't say more than solid. And Monday night, we got the Ravens at the Chargers. Let's talk Zay Flowers now. Is it going to be a boom or a bust week?
The problem with Zay Flowers is you put him on your bench, you're kicking yourself. The Chargers just got torched by Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. We've seen him have great games in tough matchups like against the Denver Broncos. I can't sit Zay Flowers, but I also can't say strong start. I'll just say risky, solid start.
I know what you mean. I feel like I still, for the most part, like to have Flowers in my lineup. It really depends who else you got. I'm going to say this week in this matchup on the road against the Chargers, I'm just going to say he's a very high upside flex play. That said, Rashad Bateman, I guess, is still the number 2 receiver there because they have nobody else worth playing. What do you do with Bateman?
This week against the Chargers, I'm going to bench Bateman.
If I got Flowers in the flex tier, Bateman is on my bench. Now for the Bolts, who keep passing it more and more, Ladd McConkey is the number 1 guy there. Against this Ravens secondary, it almost feels too good to be true. Is this a trap?
I hope not. It shouldn't be. I'm going to say Ladd McConkey this week against the Ravens at home. Strong start.
He really should be a strong start. Let's just start Ladd and hope for the best. And then Quentin Johnston, the guy cannot stop scoring touchdowns. How high can you put him?
Can't put him as high as Ladd, even though he outscored Ladd technically last week. He's not getting the target share that Ladd is getting. So I'm going to say this week, though, in this matchup, he's a solid start.
Agreed, because it's the Ravens and that secondary. Quentin Johnston should be a solid start. If you didn't catch the running back start sit video or any of the other videos we got to help you win in Week 12, well, it's all right here on the playlist.